second the air leaves the room, the moment they realize their usual scripts, their practiced emotional traps, and their subtle provocations are simply landing on solid stone? You didn't raise your voice. You didn't cry. You just looked at them with a terrifying clarity that said you were no longer a participant in their theater of the absurd. That silence? It was the loudest sound of your life. There was a time when you would have jumped. You would have defended yourself, explained your intentions, or tried to fix the misunderstanding that they deliberately created to keep you off balance. You used to be the reliable emotional battery for them, providing whatever charge they needed, be it your anger, your tears, or your frantic attempts at reconciliation. But that version of you has effectively vanished. You remember the confusion, don't you? The way you felt like you were reading from a script you never signed up for. Every conversation felt like a minefield where the rules changed whenever you were about to win. You were not crazy, and you were not too sensitive. You were simply a person who loved with integrity, trapped in a game played by someone who treated human connection like a zero-sum war. Think back to those days when you felt like you were walking on broken glass. Every day was a performance, curated to avoid triggering their next mood swing or outburst. You were constantly scanning their face, their tone, the slight shift in their posture, waiting for the storm to hit. It was an exhausting way to exist, existing entirely to pacify a void that could never, ever be filled by your love. But then, something subtle shifted within your own walls. It wasn't a grand explosion or a dramatic walkout. It was a quiet, internal resignation. You stopped explaining. You stopped justifying your existence. You realized that no amount of logic could ever pierce the armor they wore to protect their fragile, false self. And the moment you stopped playing the game, you became a mystery they couldn't solve. They tried to turn up the volume, didn't they? When their usual manipulations failed, they escalated. They pushed harder, threw more chaos into the mix, and tried to bait you back into the familiar pattern of circular arguments. They needed you to react because your reaction was the proof they had power over you. Without that reaction, their performance was just a monologue in an empty room, and they hated it. You didn't realize it then, but your lack of response was the most powerful weapon you could have wielded. By refusing to engage in their madness, you were effectively cutting off the oxygen to the fire they kept burning. Every time you remained calm, every time you chose peace over a fight, you were dismantling the foundation they built their control upon. You were taking your power back one breath at a time. People around you might not have understood. They might have called you cold, distant, or even unreasonable for withdrawing. They didn't see the years of emotional battering, the gaslighting, and the slow erosion of your spirit. They didn't see that your silence wasn't an act of cruelty, it was an act of survival. You were protecting what was left of your soul from a predator who never planned to stop. The beauty of it is that they couldn't understand why you changed. To them, the world is a series of transactions, and if you aren't paying, you are broken. They see everything through the lens of utility and power, so your sudden indifference was a glitch in their matrix. They couldn't compute that a human being could simply decide to opt out of their suffering. You were becoming impossible to read, and it scared them. This is the origin story of your liberation. It started not with a loud confrontation, but with the quiet, steady decision that you were worth more than their chaos. You recognized that the game was rigged, and you decided that the only way to win was to refuse to play. This wasn't about hurting them, it was about finally setting yourself free from the psychological prison they had built for you. What most people never realize is that their need for your reaction was actually an addiction. Just as a gambler needs the rush of the spin, they needed the volatile high of your emotional turmoil. When you stopped providing that hit, you didn't just annoy them, you sent them into a state of psychological withdrawal. They tried every trick in the book to lure you back into the cycle, but you had finally seen the patterns. Think about the way they used to twist your words. They would take something innocent you said and turn it into an indictment of your character, all to make you doubt your own memory. It was brilliant and cruel, a psychological sleight of hand designed to keep you questioning your reality. But once you stopped taking the bait, the trick lost its effectiveness. You stopped defending yourself against phantom accusations. Here is the secret truth they never wanted you to discover. They were never really seeing you. They were seeing a projection of their own insecurities, their own hatred, and their own unmet needs. You were just a mirror they used to feel something, anything, inside that hollow space they carried. When you stopped reflecting back what they wanted to see, they panicked because they couldn't find themselves anymore. They viewed your boundaries as a personal attack. To them, a boundary is just a wall they need to break down to get to the resources on the other side. When you started saying no, they pushed. When you started walking away, they chased. But when you held that line with a calm, unwavering resolve, they hit a barrier they couldn't dismantle. That was the first time they truly realized they didn't own you. It gets even more disturbing when you realize they didn't just want your attention, they wanted your essence. They wanted to consume your light because theirs had gone out a long time ago. Your empathy, your capacity to forgive, your ability to see the good in people, these were the very traits they weaponized against you. By withholding these from them, you weren't starving them, you were simply reclaiming your light. Remember the love-bombing phases, those dizzying moments where you felt like the center of their universe? It was never about love. It was about creating a baseline of intoxication so that when they inevitably dropped you into the valley, the crash would feel like your fault. You were being conditioned, groomed to crave their approval, and trained to believe that their abuse was just a test of your loyalty. Once you saw this for what it was, a manipulative cycle rather than a relationship, the spell broke. You stopped searching for the real them, the person you thought existed deep down inside. You accepted the reality that who they showed you was all there was. That realization was painful, but it was the key that unlocked your cage. You were no longer waiting for a version of them that was never coming back. This is why they couldn't handle your change. You were no longer the puppet dancing on their strings. You were the person holding the scissors. Every time they tried to gaslight you, you simply stated your truth and refused to argue. Every time they tried to provoke you with guilt, you remained neutral. You were no longer an active participant in their misery, and that made you dangerous to their delicate ego. They started to panic as their influence over you evaporated. You became the one thing they fear most, an independent entity with your own perception, your own judgment, and your own will. They tried to isolate you, smear you, or guilt you, but none of it stuck because you were no longer looking at them for validation. You were looking at yourself, and for the first time in years, you liked what you saw. This was the moment the balance of power shifted forever. You didn't do it with aggression, you did it with detachment. You treated their tantrums like weather, a storm passing through that you simply waited out. You weren't playing their game anymore, and the realization that they had lost their grip on you sent them into a tailspin. You were finally, irrevocably, beyond their reach. You thought you were the one losing, but look closer. While you were feeling the pain of the detachment, they were feeling the terror of the void. They were terrified because, without you, they had to face the reality of their own existence. They realized that their supply had run dry, that the person they thought they could manipulate indefinitely had become a ghost to them. You weren't weak, you were disappearing. That is the plot twist they never saw coming. You thought you were failing at the relationship, but you were actually succeeding at reclaiming your life. Every time they tried to bait you and you didn't bite, they felt a little more insignificant. They lost their access to your emotions, and in their world, if they can't control you, you don't exist to them. But you were becoming more real than ever. It wasn't about you leaving them, it was about you leaving the version of yourself that they had created. You were shedding the skin of a victim and growing into something they couldn't comprehend. They watched you start to thrive, start to laugh again, and start to find peace, and it infuriated them. How could you be happy without them? That question alone tortured them every single day. You started to notice their frantic attempts to get back into your head. They sent the hoovering messages, the breadcrumbs of affection, or the calculated insults, all desperate pleas to see if you would still snap. When you didn't, they didn't just feel rejected, they felt obsolete. That was the moment you realized they were the ones who were actually needy, pathetic, and fundamentally lost. The realization hit you like a wave. They were never the strong one. The bully is always the most insecure person in the room. You saw their arrogance for what it was, a flimsy mask covering up a deep, cavernous insecurity that they could never admit, even to themselves. You weren't intimidated by them anymore because you could see right through the act. You were no longer afraid of the shadow they cast. They didn't win. They never won. They just spent years convincing you that they did so you would stop fighting. But you never stopped fighting, you just changed how you fought. You moved from external battlefields to internal fortresses. You stopped fighting them and started fighting for yourself, which turned out to be the most effective strategy possible. They lost because they never accounted for your resilience. Think of all the times you apologized for things you didn't do. You were carrying their shame, their guilt, and their projections. When you dropped that weight, they were the ones who had to carry it again. You left them with their own mess, and that is a burden they are terrified to bear. That is the truth behind their anger. They are angry that they have to be themselves again. They are still searching, of course. They are out there right now, looking for another person to fill the void you left, trying to find someone else to play the game with. But they are haunted by you. You are the one who got away, the one who saw behind the curtain and walked out of the theater. You are the standard they measure every new victim against, and you are the one they can never replicate. You weren't just a partner, you were their favorite audience, and you gave them a performance of your own life that they didn't deserve. Now, the stage is empty, the lights are dimmed, and they are left in the dark. They are wandering through their own cycle, repeating the same lines to new faces, but the scripts are getting thinner and the audiences are getting harder to fool. You changed the game for everyone. The twist was always this: your silence was not the end of the conversation, it was the end of their control. You reclaimed your voice by choosing not to use it against them, and you reclaimed your narrative by choosing not to let them write it. They are trapped in their loop, forever searching for a replacement, while you are out here, living a life they couldn't even dream of. They lost everything because they lost you. Now, let's look at where they are. You might think they are out there living their best life, posting curated images and charming new people, but you have to look past the performance. They are suffering from a chronic inability to experience authentic intimacy. They are trapped in a self-made prison of superficiality, where every connection is a transaction and every partner is just a mirror they eventually break. The consequences of their behavior are not some grand, karmic explosion. They are a slow, grinding erosion of the soul. They are losing the ability to connect with anyone on a human level. Their isolation is profound, even when they are surrounded by people. Because they never learned to trust, they can never be trusted, and deep down, they know that every relationship they build is destined to crumble. They are collecting people, not relationships. They have a catalog of faces that have come and gone, but they have no history of deep, enduring, loving bonds. When they look back at their life, they don't see shared joy or genuine connection. They see a trail of wreckage and broken trust. That is a lonely way to exist, knowing that you are the architect of your own emotional desert. They spend their days monitoring the people they have discarded, wondering if you are talking about them, wondering if you are happy, wondering if you have finally forgotten them. The irony is that you have moved on, while they are still tethered to the past. They are the ones who are truly trapped, watching your life from the sidelines, consumed by the resentment of knowing you don't need them to survive. Their distrust is their shadow. Because they constantly manipulate others, they assume everyone else is doing the same thing. They live in a world of constant suspicion, always scanning for betrayal, always projecting their own darkness onto the people around them. They cannot love because they cannot stop calculating. They have traded the possibility of deep, vulnerable connection for the safety of control. There is no joy in their world, only the fleeting dopamine rush of a win. Once the hunt is over, they are bored. Once the victim is captured, they are disgusted. They are stuck on a treadmill of pursuit, never able to sit still and simply enjoy the presence of another human being. It is an exhausting way to live, and they are destined to repeat it until they have nothing left to give and no one left to give it to. You see, they didn't just lose you, they lost the capacity for peace. You have the ability to sit in a room by yourself, to find joy in a quiet moment, to experience empathy and love without an ulterior motive. They cannot. They are defined by their hunger, and a person who is always hungry can never be satisfied. Their life is an endless, frantic search for a fulfillment that will never arrive. They have become the victim of their own character. They have pushed away anyone who offered them real, honest love because that love was too bright, too challenging, and too real for them to handle. They have surrounded themselves with sycophants and victims who will tolerate them, but they know, deep in their gut, that none of it is real. They are the loneliest people you will ever meet. They thought they were the masters of your universe, but they were actually just small, frightened children masquerading as adults. The collapse wasn't triggered by you. It was the inevitable result of their own design. They couldn't build a life on lies and expect it to hold up. The structure was rotten from the start, and it was always going to come down. You just happened to be the one who walked out first. They are watching you from afar, seeing you bloom, seeing you thrive, and seeing you become the person you were always meant to be. That is their greatest torture. It is the realization that you were never the problem. You were the treasure they were too small to hold, and now they have to live the rest of their lives knowing they lost the one thing that could have offered them a shred of redemption. Look at who you have become since you stopped playing their game. You are no longer the person who needs permission to exist. You are no longer the person who apologizes for your boundaries. You are a person who knows the value of your own time, your own energy, and your own peace. You have built a fortress out of self-respect, and nothing, not even their memory, can breach those walls anymore. Your healing wasn't about forgetting what happened to you. It was about integrating it into the story of your strength. You took the trauma and turned it into wisdom. You took the pain and turned it into discernment. You are no longer a victim. You are a survivor who has seen the darkness and decided to walk toward the light. That makes you stronger than anyone who hasn't walked this path. There is a profound freedom in boredom. For so long, your life was defined by the drama they created, the highs and the lows, the constant state of vigilance. Now, you can appreciate the quiet moments. You can enjoy a morning coffee without fear. You can pursue your dreams without needing their approval. You have discovered that peace is not an absence of excitement. It is the presence of security. You have reclaimed your intuition. You used to silence that inner voice because it told you things you didn't want to hear about them. Now you listen. You trust your gut, you respect your feelings, and you honor your needs. You are no longer gaslighting yourself to keep the peace. You are living in alignment with your truth, and that is a beautiful, unstoppable force that will guide you to where you need to go. You are the hero of this story, not because you defeated them in a battle, but because you refused to become like them. When you had every right to be bitter, to be cruel, and to be vengeful, you chose to be kind, to be whole, and to be healed. You chose to rise above the debris. That is the ultimate act of defiance. You survived their abuse without losing your humanity, and that is a victory that lasts forever. Look at your life now. Look at the people who love you for who you are, not for what you can do for them. You have created a community of authentic connection. You have learned how to be vulnerable with safe people. You have learned the difference between a sacrifice and a betrayal. You are building a future that is entirely your own, brick by brick, foundation by foundation, in a way they will never understand. The anger you felt is fading, replaced by a quiet, steady resolve. You don't need them to apologize. You don't need them to admit what they did. You don't need them to validate your experience. You have validated yourself. You have given yourself the permission to be enough, exactly as you are. And once you grant yourself that permission, no one on this earth can ever take it away from you again. You have learned that your capacity to love was never a weakness. It was a superpower. The mistake wasn't that you loved too much. The mistake was loving the wrong person. Now, you have the wisdom to discern, to protect, and to nurture. You have become a person who can love deeply without losing yourself. You are the architect of your own joy, and that is a power that creates its own light. Walk forward with your head held high, knowing that you walked through the fire and came out refined. You are not defined by what they did to you, you are defined by how you chose to heal from it. You are a testament to the power of the human spirit to overcome, to adapt, and to bloom. Your life is no longer a response to their presence. It is a manifestation of your own potential. The greatest punishment for a narcissist is watching the person they tried to break finally become impossible to control. They spent years trying to become your center, but in the end, they taught you how to become your own. You are no longer a character in their story, you are the author of your own, and the pages ahead are yours to write with all the power, clarity, and peace you have finally claimed.